You do not choose where life changes you. It chooses for you. The words echoed softly through the empty marble lobby of Blackstone Hotel just moments before the Christmas gala began, where Manhattan's elite gathered under golden chandeliers and artificial snow drifted gently from ceiling vents like a carefully designed dream. Ethan Blackwell stood near the entrance, adjusting his black suit cuff with mechanical precision, his expression unreadable as always. At 38 years old, he was known across New York as a man who controlled outcomes before they happened. Investments, markets, even people. Tonight, however, something felt slightly off balance, though he would never admit it. "Mr. Blackwell, your guest has arrived," a staff member said quietly. Ethan nodded without looking up. Blind dates were a concept he had always considered inefficient, but tonight was different. Marcus insisted it was necessary. Human connection cannot be optimized, Marcus had joked earlier that week, though Ethan did not find it amusing. Across the room, Claire Donovan moved between tables dressed in a simple black uniform with a white apron, balancing trays of champagne glasses with quiet focus. She did not look at the glittering guests unless necessary. She never lingered. She never interrupted the invisible hierarchy of wealth that filled the room. Yet something about her presence felt anchored, like she belonged nowhere in particular and therefore belonged everywhere equally. Ethan's attention drifted briefly toward her as another voice entered his space. "You look like you are about to sign a merger agreement instead of meeting a woman," Marcus said, appearing beside him with a half smile. "I am here because you insisted," Ethan replied. Marcus laughed softly. "And because I am right. You need this." Before Ethan could respond, the woman he assumed would be his blind date arrived. Vanessa Carlyle stepped into the gala like she owned the air itself, wearing a silver dress that reflected every chandelier in the room. She kissed Ethan's cheek lightly and smiled for the cameras that immediately turned toward them. "I hope I am worth the effort," she said playfully. Ethan offered a polite nod, but his eyes drifted away almost instantly. Claire was at the far end of the ballroom now, refilling glasses near a group of investors laughing loudly about market projections. One of them made a dismissive comment about service staff, and Claire simply lowered her eyes, saying nothing, continuing her work with steady composure. Vanessa followed Ethan's gaze and tilted her head. "Are you seriously looking at the waitress?" she asked under her breath, amused. Ethan did not answer immediately, because he was not sure why he was looking. It was not admiration. It was not curiosity, he understood. It was something quieter, something unsettling. The feeling that in a room full of people trying to be seen, the only person who seemed completely real was the one no one was watching. The ballroom doors opened wider as more guests arrived, bringing in a wave of cold air mixed with the scent of winter snow. Ethan Blackwell stood near the edge of the Christmas gala, still holding the untouched glass of champagne that had been placed in his hand nearly 20 minutes ago. He had not taken a single sip. His attention, despite every attempt to redirect it, kept returning to the same place. Claire Donovan moved through the crowd with quiet precision, balancing trays with a steadiness that seemed unaffected by the chaos of wealth and status around her. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She simply moved as if every step had a purpose that did not depend on being noticed. Marcus appeared again at Ethan's side, watching him with mild amusement. "You are still looking at her," Marcus said casually. Ethan did not deny it immediately. "I am observing the environment," he replied. Marcus smiled slightly. "That is what you said last time you were interested in something." Ethan finally turned his gaze away, though not fully convinced by his own distraction. "She is not part of this world," Ethan said quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Neither are you if you are honest. You just learned how to pretend better." Across the room, Claire overheard a fragment of laughter from a nearby table discussing investment portfolios and holiday bonuses. She adjusted her tray slightly and continued walking, her expression unchanged. To her, this world was predictable. People spoke loudly when they wanted attention and softly when they wanted control. Neither interested her. What interested her was finishing her shift without being pulled into someone else's expectations. Ethan eventually found himself moving closer to the service corridor where Claire had disappeared moments earlier. He was not entirely sure why he followed. It was not curiosity alone. It was something more subtle, like a question that had been forming in the back of his mind without permission. When he reached the corridor entrance, he saw her briefly alone, setting down an empty tray near a small service station. The lighting here was softer, less polished than the ballroom, revealing exhaustion that the main floor never saw. Claire rolled her shoulders slightly, unaware she was being watched. Ethan stepped forward just enough for her to notice him. "You do not belong in there," he said before he could reconsider the words. Claire turned her head slowly, not surprised, only tired. "Neither do half the people inside that room," she replied. Ethan paused. That was not the answer he expected. "Then why stay?" he asked. Claire looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. "Because staying is easier than leaving when people depend on you not to disappear." The answer was simple, but it carried weight he did not immediately understand. Before he could respond, a distant call came from the ballroom, signaling her to return to work. Claire picked up her tray again without urgency. "Excuse me," she said politely, stepping past him. Ethan remained in the corridor for a moment after she left, the noise of the gala returning to fill the space she had just occupied. But something had shifted. For the first time that night, the most powerful man in the room realized he had no idea what kind of life could produce someone who looked at him without needing anything in return. The rain had already begun to fall by the time Ethan Blackwell stepped out of the limousine in front of the Blackstone Hotel, its polished glass doors reflecting the city lights like fractured gold across the wet pavement. Inside, the Christmas gala was already in full motion, a carefully orchestrated display of wealth, influence, and quiet competition hidden beneath polite smiles and champagne glasses. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks as he entered, his expression composed, unreadable, the kind of calm that had been mistaken for confidence his entire life. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A scheduled appearance, a brief dinner, a blind date arranged by Marcus, whom Ethan suspected had far too much entertainment in disrupting his life. He had already decided the evening would be forgettable. That decision changed the moment he saw her. Claire Donovan stood near the service entrance wearing a simple black uniform, her presence almost invisible to the room, yet somehow more grounded than anything else inside it. She moved with quiet precision between tables, never rushing, never seeking attention, yet never seeming lost either. Ethan watched her for a moment longer than necessary as she placed a glass of water down for an elderly guest with trembling hands. "Thank you, dear," the woman said softly. Claire only nodded once before continuing her work. Marcus appeared beside Ethan, following his gaze immediately. "Do not tell me," Marcus said lightly. "You are already analyzing the staff." Ethan did not respond at first. His attention remained fixed. "She does not behave like someone trying to be noticed," Ethan said finally. Marcus smirked. "That is because she is not trying to impress you. Dangerous concept, I know." Ethan ignored the comment and took a slow step forward into the room. Across the ballroom, Claire continued working, unaware of the quiet shift in attention forming around her. She was used to being overlooked. That was the rhythm of her world. People spoke past her, not to her. But she had learned long ago that silence was not emptiness. It was space. Space to observe. Space to endure. Space to decide what mattered. The blind date Ethan had been told about arrived shortly after. Vanessa Carlyle entered like a photograph designed for magazines, perfect posture, controlled smile, every movement curated for impact. She greeted Ethan with familiarity that felt rehearsed, not warm. "You look like you were not expecting me," she said with a light laugh. Ethan offered a polite nod, though his attention briefly drifted again toward Claire as she adjusted a tray and stepped aside to let a waiter pass. Vanessa followed his gaze with immediate irritation. "Seriously," she whispered. "You are looking at the waitress?" Ethan turned back slowly. "I am observing the room," he replied. Vanessa gave a small laugh, unconvinced. "Of course you are." But Ethan was no longer listening. Because Claire had just paused near a table where a group of executives were speaking too loudly about profit margins and year-end bonuses. One of them, without looking at her, made a dismissive comment about service staff not understanding real value. Claire said nothing. She simply placed the drinks down with steady hands and walked away. No reaction. No acknowledgement. But Ethan noticed something subtle. The way her shoulders remained steady. Not lowered. Not defensive. Just steady. As if nothing in that comment had the authority to define her. Marcus leaned in again beside Ethan, lowering his voice. You are doing it again. Doing what? Ethan asked. Looking like you are about to change your entire life because of someone carrying a tray. Ethan exhaled slowly, his eyes still following Claire as she disappeared toward the corridor leading to the service area. That is not what this is, he said quietly. But even as he said it, he did not fully believe it. The moment Vanessa Carlyle finished speaking, the entire ballroom seemed to tighten in silence before erupting into scattered laughter that was quickly hidden behind champagne glasses and polite coughing. Ethan Blackwell stood motionless for a brief second, as if the air itself had become heavier around him. Vanessa had just walked away from their table with a sharp smile and a dismissive comment about charity entertainment, leaving behind a space that felt colder than the snow outside. Ethan slowly placed his untouched glass on the table. Around him conversations resumed, but they no longer reached him the same way. Claire Donovan had witnessed the exchange from a distance while refilling a nearby table. She did not react outwardly, but something in her expression shifted ever so slightly, not judgment, not surprise, but recognition of a familiar pattern. Wealth speaking loudly. People remaining silent. Ethan turned without fully deciding to and began walking toward the edge of the ballroom where Claire was finishing her task. Marcus noticed immediately but did not intervene this time, instead watching with a quiet expression that suggested curiosity rather than amusement. Claire placed the last glass on the table and adjusted her tray when she saw Ethan approaching. I believe your evening is becoming complicated, she said calmly before he even spoke. Ethan exhaled slowly. It was already complicated before I arrived. Claire gave a faint nod. That is usually how these nights work. A brief pause followed, filled only by distant music and the soft clinking of glassware. Ethan glanced back toward the main floor where Vanessa was now speaking with another group of guests, laughter still orbiting her like an accessory. That was unnecessary, Ethan said quietly. Claire tilted her head slightly. Which part? Ethan looked back at her. The way she spoke to you. Claire did not react immediately. Then she answered in the same steady tone. People say things when they think it does not matter who hears them. Ethan studied her carefully. Does it matter to you? Claire adjusted the strap of her tray, preparing to move again. If it mattered every time, I would not be able to work here. That answer stayed in the air longer than expected. Ethan noticed something he had not before. There was no bitterness in her voice. No resentment. Just acceptance shaped into discipline. Marcus appeared again at the edge of the corridor, checking his watch. You are supposed to be at a dinner table, not a philosophical seminar, he said lightly. Ethan ignored him. You handled that situation earlier with Vanessa better than most people would have, Ethan said to Claire. Claire gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. It was not a situation. It was just noise. Ethan frowned slightly. Most people would call it disrespect. Claire met his eyes briefly. Most people are tired of correcting disrespect that does not change anything. That sentence landed differently. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just final in a way Ethan could not easily argue against. For a moment, the noise of the gala seemed to fade again around them. Ethan looked at her longer this time, not as a guest observing service staff, but as someone trying to understand a language he had never learned. You speak like someone who has made peace with things most people fight against, he said quietly. Claire paused, then replied simply, peace is not always a choice. Sometimes it is what is left when everything else takes too much energy. A soft announcement echoed through the ballroom, signaling the final hour of the gala. Guests began shifting toward departure, conversations becoming looser, laughter slightly louder, as if trying to preserve the last moments of the evening. Ethan remained still. Claire turned slightly toward the service corridor again, ready to return to her duties. Before she stepped away, Ethan spoke one last time. Will you still be here after this ends? Claire hesitated briefly, then nodded. Yes. Someone has to close everything down. Ethan watched her disappear into the quieter side of the hotel, realizing that while the rest of the room was preparing to leave, he was no longer certain he wanted to. The apology lingered in the air longer than the words themselves. Ethan Blackwell stood still near the edge of the ballroom, watching Claire Donovan return to her work without hesitation, as if the moment that had just unfolded carried no weight beyond its immediate necessity. Around them, the Christmas gala continued to breathe in polished cycles of laughter, glass clinking, and soft orchestral music that masked the tension beneath it. Vanessa Carlyle had already disappeared into another circle of guests, her earlier comment dissolving into the crowd as if it had never fully existed. Yet Ethan could still feel it, not the insult itself, but the reaction it had triggered inside him. Claire moved past him again with a fresh tray, her steps steady despite the growing intensity of the room. The charity announcements resumed on stage, listing donations that sounded impressive in numbers but distant in meaning. Ethan noticed how Claire did not look toward the stage once, not out of disrespect but disinterest, as if value in that form did not apply to her attention. Marcus approached quietly from behind Ethan, lowering his voice. "You are not leaving," Marcus said. It was not a question. Ethan did not respond immediately. His eyes followed Claire as she briefly paused near a table where a child had dropped a napkin. Without hesitation, she bent down, picked it up, and placed it back gently beside the plate before continuing on. "I do not think I am finished here," Ethan said finally. Marcus raised an eyebrow. With the gala or with her? Ethan did not answer that either. The lighting in the ballroom flickered slightly as the storm outside intensified, pressing against the city with increasing force. A distant announcement came through the speakers, briefly disrupted by static, informing guests of minor weather delays affecting transportation. Some guests laughed it off. Others checked their phones. Claire remained unaffected, though her pace subtly adjusted as she prepared for the final rounds of service. Ethan found himself moving again without clear intention, crossing the ballroom toward the quieter corridor where she often disappeared between tasks. When he reached her, she was briefly alone near the service station, refilling water glasses with calm precision. "The storm is getting worse," Ethan said. Claire did not look up immediately. "It usually does in December." Ethan studied her for a moment. "Do you live far from here?" Claire paused slightly before answering. "Far enough." "That is not an answer," Ethan said. A faint hint of something almost like amusement touched her expression. "It is the only answer that matters when you are used to figuring out how to get home no matter what." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing that without interrupting. A sudden power fluctuation dimmed the lights for a brief second, causing a ripple of quiet reactions across the ballroom before everything stabilized again. Claire exhaled softly, as if mentally adjusting to the possibility of a longer night. "You should return to your guest," she said again, repeating the boundary she had established earlier. Ethan looked back toward the main floor where Vanessa stood surrounded by conversation he no longer felt connected to. Then he looked back at Claire. "I think I already did," he said quietly. Claire stopped moving for the first time since he had known her presence that night. Not fully turning, not responding immediately, just pausing in a way that suggested she understood the weight of what he was not fully saying. And in that moment, while the city outside prepared to collapse further into winter silence, Ethan Blackwell realized that every part of his night had slowly shifted toward a single point he no longer had control over. The snowfall outside the Blackstone Hotel had become heavier, pressing against the glass walls like a quiet force trying to slow time itself. Inside, the Christmas gala continued in full motion, but something subtle had already shifted in the atmosphere between Ethan Blackwell and Claire Donovan. Ethan stood near the edge of the ballroom, no longer fully participating in the conversations around him. His attention kept returning to her. Claire moved with steady rhythm through the crowd, balancing trays, refilling glasses, and clearing empty plates with a calm efficiency that never sought attention yet somehow commanded it anyway. Marcus observed Ethan from a short distance, noticing the change in his focus. "You are still not leaving," Marcus said quietly as he approached. Ethan did not look away from Claire. "Not yet," he replied. Marcus followed his gaze. "You are aware she is working, right?" Ethan finally turned slightly. "I am aware of that." Claire passed nearby again, and for a brief moment, their eyes nearly aligned, though she did not stop. She simply continued forward, as if acknowledging him would interrupt the balance of her work. That restraint itself affected him more than any invitation would have. A sudden announcement echoed across the ballroom, reminding guests of the ongoing charity fundraiser for families impacted by the winter storm. Applause followed, polite and measured. Ethan barely heard it. His focus was still on Claire. Moments later, he found himself moving again, crossing the polished floor toward the quieter service corridor where she had just disappeared. The corridor was dimmer, removed from the glitter of the main event. Claire stood there briefly alone, organizing trays and adjusting her apron before returning to the floor. Ethan stopped a few feet away. "You never stop," he said. Claire looked up calmly. "Neither do you. You just sit down between meetings." The comment was simple, not mocking but observant. Ethan exhaled lightly, almost a silent acknowledgement. "This is different," he said. Claire tilted her head slightly. Everything is different to someone when they are not used to paying attention to it. Ethan paused at that, letting the words settle. Around them the muffled sound of the gala continued, distant like another world. "Do you ever think about staying somewhere else?" he asked. Claire did not answer immediately. Instead, she placed the last glass onto the tray with precise care. "Thinking about something and being able to change it are not the same thing," she said finally. Ethan studied her carefully. There was no complaint in her tone. No regret. Only acceptance shaped by experience. A faint flicker of lights passed overhead as the storm outside caused another brief power fluctuation. The corridor remained steady, but the moment felt suspended. Ethan lowered his voice. "You make it sound like choice does not exist." Claire met his gaze briefly. "Choice exists, but so do responsibilities people never see." Before Ethan could respond, a call came from the ballroom staff signaling her return. Claire adjusted her tray and prepared to leave. She paused only once before stepping back into the light. "You should go back," she said. "People will start noticing you are gone." Ethan watched her walk away, disappearing into the glow of the ballroom once again. For a long moment he did not move, because for the first time that night, he realized he was not the one deciding where his attention belonged anymore. The final hours of the Christmas gala unfolded like a slow exhale after a long night of emotional tension. Outside the Blackstone Hotel, the snowstorm had not stopped, but inside, the energy had shifted from celebration to quiet departure. Guests began collecting coats, exchanging polite goodbyes, and preparing to leave behind the polished illusion of the evening. Ethan Blackwell stood near the grand staircase, no longer engaging in conversation, his attention anchored somewhere across the room where Claire Donovan was finishing her final duties. She moved with the same steady calm she had maintained all night, gathering empty glasses and straightening tables as if the chaos of the evening had never touched her. Marcus approached one last time, his tone lighter but observant. "You are not going to tell me you are staying for cleanup duty," Marcus said. Ethan did not respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Claire as she handed a folded napkin to an elderly guest who had dropped it moments earlier. "I am not staying for cleanup," Ethan finally said. Marcus smiled slightly. "Then what are you staying for?" Ethan hesitated, and for the first time that night, he did not have a calculated answer ready. Across the ballroom, Claire finished her final table and adjusted her apron, preparing to leave the floor. The charity director gave a final announcement thanking all donors, and applause briefly filled the space again before fading into scattered conversations. Claire stepped toward the service corridor, moving away from the main hall, unaware that Ethan had already started walking toward her. When she reached the corridor entrance, she stopped, sensing his presence before he spoke. "Your shift is over," Ethan said. Claire turned slightly. "Yes. It usually ends around this time." Ethan nodded once. "Then you can leave." Claire studied him briefly. "So can you." A faint silence settled between them again, not uncomfortable but unresolved. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom one last time, where the final guests were disappearing into winter coats and limousine doors waiting outside. "I do not think I want to leave yet," he said quietly. Claire adjusted her coat, preparing to step fully into the corridor. "People like you usually do not stay in places like this longer than necessary," she said. Ethan exhaled slowly. "People like me usually do not meet people like you in places like this." Claire paused, then gave a small, almost unreadable expression that was neither agreement nor disagreement. "Maybe that is why it feels unfamiliar," she said. A distant sound of wind pressed against the hotel windows, reminding them that the storm outside was still present, still waiting. Ethan looked at her more directly now, no longer observing from a distance or from within the crowd. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Claire did not answer immediately, not because she did not understand the question but because she understood it too clearly. After a moment she replied simply, "I will be here when people need service." Ethan nodded slowly, as if trying to translate that answer into something more personal. Claire stepped into the corridor, then stopped briefly before disappearing completely. "Good night," she said. Ethan remained where he was as she walked away, the sound of the gala fading behind him, replaced by the quieter truth of the emptying room. And for the first time since the night began, he realized that leaving would be easier than staying with the feeling that had quietly taken root inside him. The corridor outside the main ballroom had grown quieter as the last wave of guests slowly disappeared into the Manhattan snowstorm, their footsteps muffled by thick white silence outside the Blackstone Hotel. Inside, the warm golden light still spilled from the chandeliers, but it now felt distant, almost like a memory already fading. Ethan Blackwell stood near the edge of the corridor, no longer surrounded by conversation or expectation, only the echo of everything that had happened that night. Claire Donovan had not yet left the building. She was finishing final checks near the service exit, her movements slower now, slightly more human in their fatigue, yet still controlled and precise as always. Ethan watched her without speaking for a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to understand why this silence felt heavier than any negotiation he had ever handled. Claire finally noticed him standing there. "You are still here," she said, her voice calm but not surprised. Ethan nodded slightly. "I said I was not leaving yet." Claire adjusted the strap of her coat, preparing for the cold outside. "Most people do not mean that literally." Ethan looked at her more directly now. "I do." A brief silence formed between them again, different from earlier now, less about observation and more about recognition. The noise of the gala had fully faded behind them, replaced by the distant hum of elevators and the soft sound of winter wind pressing against the glass walls of the hotel. Claire picked up a small bag from behind the counter, the last of her personal belongings. "You should go," she said again, not as a request, but as a statement of natural order. Ethan hesitated. "And you should come back tomorrow?" Claire paused at that question, then gave a faint, almost unreadable expression. "Yes. Work does not stop because the weather is inconvenient." Ethan studied her for a moment longer, as if trying to find something hidden between the words she spoke. "Everything you say sounds like it belongs to someone who has learned not to expect change," he said quietly. Claire met his gaze briefly. "Expecting change does not guarantee it happens." That answer lingered in the air between them longer than expected. Ethan glanced toward the glass doors leading outside. Through them, Manhattan was almost completely blurred by the snowstorm. Taxis moving slowly, lights diffused into soft golden streaks across the street. People were leaving the gala, returning to lives that did not pause for reflection. Yet he did not move. Claire stepped slightly closer to the exit, then stopped again when she realized he was still not leaving. "Why are you still standing here?" she asked. Ethan took a slow breath. "Because when I leave, this feeling will not leave with me." Claire looked at him more carefully now, not as a guest or as a worker to a client, but as one person observing another without hierarchy for the first time. "What feeling?" she asked. Ethan hesitated again, searching for language that did not sound like logic or business. "Like something important happened and I do not yet understand what it was." Claire did not respond immediately. The corridor lights flickered faintly as the building adjusted to the storm outside. Then she spoke softly. "Not everything important announces itself while it is happening." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that sentence. Claire finally turned toward the exit, placing her hand on the door handle. Before opening it, she looked back at him one last time. "You will figure it out," she said simply. Then she stepped into the snowstorm outside, disappearing into the white blur of Manhattan night. Ethan remained in the quiet corridor, the warmth of the hotel behind him and the storm ahead, realizing that for the first time in his life, he was no longer certain which direction was meant to be the answer. The first light of dawn had not yet broken over Manhattan when Ethan Blackwell stood alone inside the empty Blackstone Hotel ballroom, where only hours earlier the Christmas gala had filled every corner with noise, laughter, and controlled elegance. Now the space felt stripped of its illusion, chairs neatly arranged, glass tables reflecting the faint glow of emergency lights still humming after the storm. Outside, snow continued to fall in slow motion, covering the city in a soft silence that seemed to erase the previous night as if it had been a dream. Ethan had not left. He stood near the same corridor where Claire Donovan had disappeared into the snow hours before, his coat still on, unmoved, as if time had paused around him. Marcus had already left a message he had not answered. Vanessa Carlyle had left a message he had not read. But none of it mattered in the same way anymore. What mattered was the absence of someone who had never asked to matter at all. He replayed the night in fragments. The waitress who did not react when spoken down to. The woman who gave away what little she had without hesitation. The voice that never raised itself but somehow stayed louder in his memory than every conversation in the ballroom combined. Ethan slowly walked toward the glass doors leading outside. The city was waking in layers of gray and white, taxis moving carefully through snow-covered streets, pedestrians bundled tightly against the cold. And then he saw her. Claire Donovan stood a short distance away near the sidewalk, holding a paper cup of coffee in both hands, her breath visible in the freezing air. She was no longer inside the structure of the gala, no longer moving through the invisible hierarchy of wealth and service. She was simply standing in the real world, unchanged by any of it. Ethan stepped outside slowly. Snow immediately touched his shoulders, but he did not feel it. Claire noticed him after a moment, her expression calm as always, as if she had expected this possibility without needing to acknowledge it. "You did not leave," she said quietly. Ethan nodded once. "I tried," he admitted. Claire gave a faint, almost imperceptible expression that was not surprise. "Most people do not stay after a night like that." Ethan looked at her carefully. "Most people do not make a night like that feel different." Claire took a slow sip of her coffee, then lowered it again. "It was just a Christmas gala," she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, it was not." A silence followed between them, softer than before, no longer filled with observation or distance, but with something unspoken that neither of them fully named. Ethan finally spoke again. "I do not understand what happened last night." Claire met his gaze steadily. "You noticed someone you usually would not notice," she said simply. Ethan exhaled slowly. "That sounds too small to explain it." Claire looked toward the snow falling around them. Small things usually change the direction of larger ones. Ethan stood there for a moment, letting the words settle into him like something unfamiliar but undeniable. The city moved behind them, indifferent and continuous, but the space between them felt still. Claire adjusted her coat, preparing to leave. Ethan hesitated before speaking one last time. "Will I see you again?" Claire paused, then answered without hesitation. "If you do, it will not be because of last night." And then she walked away into the morning snow, disappearing into the rhythm of the city, as if she had never been part of anything extraordinary at all. Ethan remained standing alone on the sidewalk, watching the place where she had gone, realizing that for the first time in his life, something had ended without closing, and that somehow made it impossible to forget.